Welcome to Protege, where we break down the invisible skills that actually accelerate your career. I'm Molly Jaggers, and I want to start with the number that dropped last week: 81 cents. That's what women earned on the dollar this year, down from 83 cents the year before. Equal Pay Day was last week, and for the second year in a row, the news wasn't stagnation, the gap got worse. And I'm not going to spend a lot of time in the outrage. That's not what this show is. But I do want to sit with what that number actually means, because I think most people are drawing the wrong conclusion from it. The default narrative is the system is broken, we're moving backward, it's getting harder. And it's not wrong, but here's what this narrative misses. That same disruption that's widening the gap is also dismantling old gatekeeping structures. Distributed work opened up access to rooms that used to require geography or luck. AI is compressing the leverage gap between people with institutional resources and people without them. And the sponsorship structures that used to gatekeep advancement, they're either being rebuilt from scratch or falling apart entirely. And both of those create real openings. The women who move through this environment aren't the ones blaming the system or waiting for it to correct itself. They're the ones who stopped waiting to be chosen and started building the kind of skills and visibility that makes that choice undeniable, which is exactly what we're digging into today. Because the old sponsorship model, the one most of us were taught, it broke. And understanding why it broke is the first step to building something better. Last week, we went internal, talking about the confidence paradox, reframing doubt, and understanding why the voice telling you you're not ready isn't always wrong. It just needs to be recalibrated. That was about your inner operating system. This week, I want to look outward because you can do all that work, build the confidence, reframe the doubt, show up with more conviction, and still hit a wall. And that wall has a name. It's the sponsorship gap. If you've been listening to this show, you know I've talked about the difference between mentors and sponsors before. Mentors give you maps and advice, whereas sponsors give you keys and access. And we've talked about building advocacy in a world where DEI programs are disappearing. Today's a bit different. Today, I'm going to show you why that traditional sponsorship model is failing, not slowly, but right now, and what's replacing it. So let's paint the picture of what's actually happening. 50% of companies dropped women's advancement as a strategic priority. Half. That's not a budget cut, that's an organizational signal. It says this isn't our problem anymore. Now, 89% of women believe DEI rollbacks will directly affect their pay equity, and 83% say that their leadership opportunities are now at risk. Now, here's also something that should reframe everything you've been told about these mentorship and sponsorship programs. 98% of Fortune 500 companies offers some form of mentorship program, but only 37% of employees say they actually benefit from them. Think about that for a second. Almost every major company in America has a mentorship program, and almost two-thirds of the people in those programs say they're not working. So we've got a system where the pay gap is widening, companies are pulling back on advancement programs, and the mentorship infrastructure that was supposed to fill in the gaps is a phantom. It looks real on paper, but it's not real in practice. That's the sponsor's dilemma. But it's not the dilemma the way you think. Here's the thing. When we say sponsor's dilemma, most people think it means I can't find a sponsor. That's the surface problem. The real dilemma is structural. The old sponsorship model worked like this. A senior leader sees a high performer, takes them under their wing, advocates for them in rooms they're not in. It was organic and it was relationship driven. And it worked when the conditions were right. But those conditions don't exist anymore. Three things broke the model at the same time. First, the rooms changed. When teams went distributed, and I don't just mean remote, I mean when the whole workforce became more fragmented, the informal interactions where sponsorship relationships just naturally formed, they evaporated. It's not as easy anymore to just bump into a VP in the hallway when there is no hallway. The casual coffee that turned into career advice, the walk and talk after a meeting, those micro moments were the connective tissue of the old model, and they're gone. Second, the incentive shifted. When companies started pulling back on diversity initiatives, the leaders who were sponsoring women lost their organizational cover. It's one thing to champion someone when the company is measuring you on it, it's another when the company just signaled it doesn't care anymore. The sponsors didn't stop believing in you, they lost the institutional backing that made championing you safe. And third, the risk calculus changed. And this is probably the most important one because sponsorship is a reputation bet. A sponsor is saying, I'm putting my credibility behind this person. In a stable environment, that bet feels manageable. But in an environment where layoffs are constant, reorgs are quarterly, and AI is reshaping every role in real time, sponsors are a lot more cautious. Not because they don't believe in you, but because the stakes of being wrong got higher. And I want to be honest about something because I think this conversation is incomplete without it. Yes, the structural forces are real, but I've also seen women, smart, capable women, attribute a sponsorship gap to bias when part of what's holding them back is a behavior pattern they don't see yet. Here's a story that stuck with me. I knew a woman on a cross functional team, sharp, high performer, who was frustrated that this male teammate of hers that she was supposed to be coordinating with on a project never followed through. She'd ask him to own something, he'd drop the ball, and she'd quietly pick it up and do it herself so the project kept moving forward. And after a while, she started wondering, is this because he doesn't take me seriously? Is this a gender thing? And as she was sharing this with me, I paused and slightly pushed back on it. I said, take a step back and look at the pattern. The first time that this guy didn't follow through, you rescued the work and finished it for him. And the second time, and the third time. So you've trained and conditioned him to wait you out because he's learned that if he waits long enough, you'll just handle it. He's not ignoring you because you're a woman, he's following the system you built. So, what was really going on was she had a real gap, holding people accountable, sitting in the discomfort of letting something slip instead of jumping in, that she'd never been forced to confront because she kept rescuing instead of holding the line. And what I remember most about this was that she didn't get defensive. She kind of got quiet because some part of her already knew. She just never had anyone name it. That's the part nobody talks about. The system can absolutely be working against you, and you can still have real gaps to close. Both things can be true at the same time. Holding that is uncomfortable, but it's also the only honest path forward. Now, I got this wrong for years. Honestly, I thought sponsorship was a relationship problem. Find the right person, build a connection, earn their trust, and that matters. It still matters. But I was solving the wrong layer of the problem. It's like having a great car that won't start and spending all your time cleaning the engine, but it turns out the engine's fine. It's the battery that's dead. So I was polishing this relationship when the ecosystem that had powered it had gone dark. And I thought, how many women are doing exactly this right now? How many are networking harder, building more connections, showing up to more events, and wondering why nothing is changing? It's not that the relationships don't matter. It's that relationships without an ecosystem to amplify them are just conversations. Good conversations, sure, but conversations that stay at the coffee table instead of traveling to rooms where decisions get made. You weren't doing the wrong things. You were doing the right things in a system that had stopped rewarding them. And if that lands for you, if you've had that feeling of working hard, showing up, doing everything you were told to do, and still feeling like you're invisible, that's not just a you problem, that's also a system problem. And it has a solution. I know because I had to find it myself. Because, yes, I am, in fact, the person who spent 3 months obsessively building a sponsor strategy early in my career. Color coded spreadsheet, followed up cadence, the works, before realizing I was optimizing a system that had already stopped working the way I thought it did. Ask me how that spreadsheet's doing right now. It's in a folder called Things I Tried That Didn't Work. So here's the question I eventually had to ask myself, and it's the one you should be sitting with right now. If the old model depended on conditions that no longer exist, organic proximity, institutional incentives, and low risk environments, then what replaces it? It's not better mentorship programs. We've got almost complete coverage and only a third of people find it effective. More of the same isn't the answer here. What replaces it is an inversion. Instead of waiting for someone with power to choose you, you become the person they can't afford not to choose. And increasingly, that's not happening inside your company. It's happening in communities where women are learning and building in proximity to leaders who are actively looking for people worth backing, and where that proximity can become exactly the kind of sponsor relationship the old model promised but rarely delivered on. So, this inversion works on three principles. And I want to be specific here because vague advice about being visible is basically the career equivalent of just be confident. It sounds great, it means nothing. So, let's get concrete here. Each of these is actionable, specific, and starts today. The first one is about making your impact impossible to ignore before anyone thinks to ask for it. Here's what I literally do. Throughout the month, whenever something lands, a win, a result, a problem I solved, I capture it. A quick note, a voice memo, it doesn't matter. Just the raw material of what happened, what the outcome was, and roughly what it was worth. And then on the first of every month, I have an automated skill that runs and does this synthesis for me. So it pulls everything I've logged, quantifies what can be quantified, and produces a clean impact summary. Revenue influence, problem solved, processes improved with numbers. So instead of a vague sense of, oh, I've been busy, I have entries like redesign the onboarding flow, cut ramp up time by 3 weeks, or identified the pricing disconnect that was losing us mid market deals, or built a competitive positioning deck that sales used to close 2 enterprise accounts. I didn't sit down and write it, I captured it in real time and let the system do the work. Why does this matter? Because when someone advocates for you in your room you're not in, they need ammunition. They need to be able to say, she cut ramp time by 3 weeks, not, she's smart and she works really hard. So you're preloading their advocacy script for them. You're handing them the words and the business proof that they need. And here's what's freeing about this, it takes the pressure off the relationship entirely. You're not asking anyone to take a leap of faith. You're making the case so obvious that advocating for you feels like stating facts. And the second one is about solving problems that travel upward. This is all about where you point your energy, because not every problem is created equal. Some problems matter to the person 2 levels above you. The work that creates sponsorship magnetism is the work that solves problems leaders care about because it puts your name in conversations you didn't even know were happening. Think about it like compound interest. Solving your team's scheduling problem earns you goodwill with your manager. Solving a cross functional bottleneck that's been frustrating the VP of operations, that earns you a reputation that travels. Same effort, different leverage. Quick filter to use is ask yourself, would my skip level leader recognize this problem instantly, or would I have to explain why it matters? If you'd have to explain it, it probably doesn't travel. If they feel it in their gut the moment you named it, that's the one worth reaching for. When I was early in my career, I spent so much energy being excellent at my assigned work. And I was, but nobody above my manager knew that. The shift was learning to identify the problems that matter at the level above me and volunteering for those. Not all of them, not constantly, but here's what it actually looked like. I remember one time I was supporting a product launch and sales looped me in to help with collateral on a stuck mid market deal. I sat in on a couple calls and I realized the problem wasn't the collateral, it was the pricing narrative. The way we were framing value wasn't landing for this buyer. And that wasn't technically my problem to solve, I was there for the deck. But I built a one pager that reframed the value story anyway and gave it to the rep. The deal closed. The VP of sales asked who built it. I hadn't asked anyone to say my name. The work was the capital that traveled upstream. The third one is where most people have the biggest gap, and it's structural. The old model was find one powerful person. That's fragile. If they leave, they get restructured, or if they lose influence, you're back to zero. It's a single point of failure in a world where everything changes quarterly. The new model is about building a micro network of advocates, not one golden sponsor. This means 3 to 5 people at different levels and in different functions who can each speak to a different dimension of your value. Your direct manager speaks to your execution. A cross functional partner speaks to your collaboration. And a skip level manager speaks to your strategic thinking. And here's what makes this work: each person only needs to see one facet of you. You're not asking anyone to champion your entire career. You're building a distributed network where each node carries a piece of the picture. So if one person leaves, the network holds. This isn't just about getting promoted at your current company, it's about building career infrastructure that works wherever you go. Portable advocacy, the kind of reputation that follows you. Now, when I think about this one, I didn't build my network intentionally at first. I just had a habit of showing up fully in cross functional work, being genuinely curious about what other teams were dealing with, following up when I said I would, sharing things I learned that I thought might be useful to someone else. Nothing strategic about it, it's just how I operated. What I didn't realize was that I was accumulating advocates without trying to. So years later, when I was making a big career move, I had 4 or 5 people in different functions and different companies who picked up the phone without me having to explain who I was or justify why they should help. One was a former skip level leader, one was a peer who I had worked with cross functionally for over a year, and one was a cohort leader from a learning program I'd done years earlier when I was actively closing a skills gap. Someone I'd learned from, stayed in touch with, and built a real relationship with through the work itself. None of them knew each other, but each one could speak to a completely different dimension of what I was capable of. And that combination of those different voices in different rooms opened a door that no single mentor could have opened alone. That's the network you're building toward, not a list of contacts, a distributed case for who you are. Most of you hearing this will nod along and do nothing. That's the pattern. You think, that makes sense, and then go back to working harder at the wrong things. The ones who won't are the ones who I call the names test. Write down every person who could speak positively about your work to someone above them. Not people who like you, people who have seen your impact and could articulate it with specifics. That sounds like she redesigned the workflow and saved us 20 hours a week. Not she's great to work with. If that list has fewer than 3 names, you've got a deficit. Now take that list and run the recency test. For each name, ask, when did they last see a measurable result from my work? If it's been more than 90 days, you're fading from their advocacy radar. Not because they forgot you, because they've got nothing current to point to. Advocates can't champion work they haven't seen. And then the last one, the distribution test, is where most people discover the real problem. Look at your list. Are all your advocates in the same function, same level, same team? Because if they are, one reorg wipes them all out. You need coverage across functions and levels. Remember, your manager speaks to execution, cross functional partner speaks to collaboration, and a skip level leader speaks to your strategic thinking. Different facets, different rooms. And look, this isn't a judgment. Most people have a deficit because nobody taught them to think about advocacy as architecture. You're not behind, you're just seeing the blueprint for the first time. If you want to actually work through it and not just think about it, this week's newsletter goes deeper. It's a fillable version of these 3 tests with specific diagnostic questions for each gap. Link is in the show notes. And here's what I want to leave you with here. There's a lot of noise and uncertainty in how to move forward right now. The conditions are what they are. You didn't create them. and it is the backdrop, but it's not the full story. The women who will move through this moment aren't the ones waiting for someone to pick them. They're the ones making that choice undeniable because their impact is too visible, too measurable, and too distributed across too many advocates to ignore. So stop seeking permission and start building proof. The sponsorship model broke, but the same forces that broke it, distributed work, organizational upheaval, AI reshaping every role, they also created something new. New ecosystems are emerging where women build skills in front of leaders who are watching, where learning happens alongside access, and where the relationship that used to require a hallway can form through a demonstrated competence instead. New stages, new ways to be seen. That's what we're going to keep talking about. Until then, thanks for listening, and I'll see you next week.